Okay, thanks for joining me today for a webinar on red light therapy for weight loss. My name is Dr. David Kanashko. I'm the medical director at BIOFLEX Laser Therapy, and we are in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, for those of you who don't know us. And we've been in the business, you might say, of red light therapy, although we like to call it photobiomodulation therapy, or sometimes it's called low-level laser therapy. But red light therapy seems to be a very common acronym used out there. So I stuck with that for today's topic. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. These webinars and all future webinars are recorded, then we edit them, and then they're uploaded onto our website, bioflexlaser.com. You can find all these webinars and more information when you go to our website homepage, top right corner under support, and you can see archived webinars, both for healthcare professionals and for consumers at home. Today's webinar is geared more towards consumers using home devices like we do sell, but it can be applied by any type of manufacturer that you may have. But I, of course, will talk a bit more about our equipment and how it can be used for this particular application. During the webinar, please type in your questions into the chat box, and I'll definitely answer those at the end of today's webinar. So I will talk a little bit about generalities about red light therapy or photobiomodulation or PBMT, and then I'll discuss sort of the latest with respect to weight loss. You know, it's a hot topic and everyone has their opinion on it, but I try and keep it scientific. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Maybe some of this information you may or may not be aware of, but it's helpful in your journey if you're trying to lose a few pounds or more pounds and keep them off. That's the goal, obviously, to be healthy, right? It's not like there's an ideal weight for everyone, like for, everyone has to be a certain weight. It's an individualistic thing, and the key is being healthy. And then I'll talk specifically about some of the science. And there's been a lot more than I thought. Well, initially, 5, 6, 7 years ago, there wasn't a lot. And now there's starting to be more and more evidence, which is kind of why I wanted to talk about it today. And then specifically, I'll talk a bit about how you might use BIOFLEX equipment to use this in part of your strategy to perhaps lose weight. If you're not familiar with our equipment, we have all sorts of different types of equipment. We have our P120, P180, and a mini port home. These are all essentially based on our professional grade equipment, where it has a pad, a light pad, and I'll talk about this in a second, and a controller of some sort. And these emit red and near infrared wavelengths. And then we also sell LED panels. This is very popular amongst consumers. I don't need to probably tell you that you see this all over social media. And we did add one to, or a couple to what we sell. And these are a little bit unique in that, basically LED panels are pretty much all the same. There are a few exceptions, and I do firmly believe that our equipment is superior because you can actually change the parameters just like you can change parameters in a professional system with respect to pulse rate and duty cycle, these types of things, which you will not find on other equipment, like, your Juve and Kayla and all these wannabe companies that think that they're experts in photobiomodulation, and I guarantee you they are not. Okay, rant over. So our equipment looks something like this. They are bicolored diodes. That is, they emit both red and near infrared out of one single diode. This is really advantageous, and we're really the only manufacturer that does this with this type of equipment. And you can emit these two wavelengths out of a single diode and therefore have a much greater power density and energy density because you can pack them pretty close together. And we do have proprietary ways of cooling these LEDs down. And this allows for a greater amount of energy that goes into the skin and through the skin for different applications, including what we're talking about today. The two wavelengths traditionally used in red light therapy, you would think red was red, of course. And you can see here this red light goes to a certain depth. Now, one should understand that red light is a really important wavelength to use in this phenomenon called photobiomodulation, but there are issues with getting red light deep. It doesn't go very deep. In part, that's because it's absorbed by other types of structures like melanin in your skin and hemoglobin in blood and some other photoacceptors, and therefore it doesn't go very deep. But near infrared light, and this has a sort of a wavelength window of roughly 780 nanometers to 900, sometimes 980, even up to 1,000 nanometers. There's been research. This can go deeper. It's less absorbed by melanin, less absorbed by water, hemoglobin, and can go much deeper. It can go into fatty tissue, for example, which is the topic of today's webinar. The controller, for example, in the personal therapy system looks something like this, where you choose sort of a specific anatomical area you want to treat, and then you can choose the intensity stage of stimulation from 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it will show you your treatment time remaining, and you can pause or start your treatment with the obvious buttons that I'm showing you here. I think that's pretty straightforward. Now, the mechanism of how red light therapy or photobiomodulation works in general has been really well studied. And in part, it has to do with this light being absorbed into cells of your body, and specifically the mitochondria, which control energy metabolism. And you might already think, well, this might have a role to play in, say, burning fat, or or dealing with lipids in your in fat cells or adipocytes, right? In part, that's maybe how it works. We're still not quite sure, but I'll get into that for sure. But part of the mechanism really has to do with the fact that it helps to control the production of ATP, which is your, of course, the powerhouse of the cell, the energy currency of the cell. And this, of course, makes the cell function. But what happens after you make ATP is you actually also then make something called cyclic AMP or CAMP. And this is a really powerful secondary messenger inside the cell that in part has a role to play with lipid metabolism, glucose metabolism, and fat burning. So it's interesting that this is probably the link as to why this may be helping, although they've speculated on other potential reasons as well, and I'll get into that. There are direct effects, so that's just what I described, where the light's directly absorbed into the cell. And then there are systemic or indirect effects. Sometimes it's called remote effects. This is where the light's being absorbed by circulating blood. And of course, in blood, you have white blood cells and you have stem cells. And when this light's absorbed in those circulating cells, your immune system, it seems to have a positive effect. And this is more important when you're dealing with injuries or repair, which your body's always trying to do on a constant basis. So the more stem cells you have floating around in your blood, right, the better are you able to heal, for example. And so light therapy has been shown to be a benefit for increasing circulating stem cells, but also helping to control inflammation through its effect on white blood cells. Now, this a little deviates from the topic today, but that's another kind of reason why red light therapy is very helpful for, injuries and aches and pains and that kind of thing. I couldn't find any super recent stats, which is weird, but this stat in particular was from the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control in the United States. And I was going to say political something, but I will not. So a quote from them is that percent of adults aged 20 and older with that are overweight, including obesity, is reaching, I'm sure you know, epidemic proportions, right? In this case, almost 74% of U.S. citizens were considered overweight. And it's a problem because it actually has ramifications on your overall health. So I think everyone realizes that it's not just about maybe how you look in your pants or your dress or whatever, but it's also how healthy you are and how as you age to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So weight management is part of this whole key, right? And as I mentioned before, that the stats are quite high with respect to this. And of course, weight loss is a lot more complicated than basically, well, I'll just eat fewer calories, right? It just doesn't really work that way. I'm going to explain that as well. The key thing here is that as many as 90% of people who have lost a considerable amount of weight, so not just a few pounds, but like, 10, 15, 20 pounds or, 8, 9, 10, 12 kilos, they gain it back. And this is the problem, right? Is that whole yo-yo kind of dieting thing, that kind of scenario that we need to be aware of. You need to have sustainable weight management, and this is possible as long as you understand, how your body responds to weight loss, right? And this is an individualistic thing, and so it's important to understand that. So the more you work out or manage caloric intake to lose your weight, the more your metabolism wants to compensate by slowing down to maintain your current weight. So this is actually called metabolic compensation. So this is part of the whole kind of problem, you might say. And this kicks in order to preserve and store fat for future energy because the human body essentially has evolved, a strategy of storing fat and energy just in case there's a shortage, which in this day and age for most people, although in some parts of the world that's obviously not the case, that fat storage is really important. Now we're going to get a little bit into some interesting science. So fat cells produce a hormone called leptin, and these bind to receptors in your brain, and essentially it triggers the body that it has enough energy. So fat cells shrink when you lose weight and they produce less leptin, which means that you don't feel as full. That's kind of part of this whole mechanisms. Now, levels can be reduced by, for example, eating soluble fiber, exercising more, getting appropriate sleep, which is a big issue. And which, by the way, I think I'm going to do a webinar on sleep. And I recently was in Boston, Massachusetts, and I met with one of the world's premier researchers in the brain and red light therapy. His name is Dr. Paulo Cassano at Harvard, out of the Massachusetts General Hospital. And they're developing a device that I'm hoping that we can be part of as well. And in part, it's used to help with better sleep and also better cognitive functioning. By the way, if you're interested in this kind of scenario, and you happen to be in the Vancouver area, we will be hosting a advanced training on treating the brain, but specifically post-concussion syndrome, but we'll talk about sleep as well coming up, and I'll have that announcement at the end of today's webinar. Also by reducing starchy foods and sugars, therefore reducing triglycerides, eating more protein, and avoiding processed foods. These are just some of the strategies with respect to leptin levels. If you look at the importance of leptin, it does lots of different things. It can activate immune cells. It can regulate different hormones like your thyroid gland. Of course, we talk about regulating appetite control. It helps in part regulate the menstrual cycle. And it also has involvement in bone mass. When it goes spikes up, it can increase your heart rate and your blood pressure, and it can activate immune cells. So this is a hormone that is still being studied and is recently discovered and has multiple roles in your body. There's another hormone called ghrelin, and that's how you pronounce it. I checked multiple times, which tells your brain when it's time to refuel. So this hormone is mainly produced by your stomach, but it's also produced in part by small intestines and pancreas and even in your brain. And ghrelin levels increase when your stomach is empty and decrease after you eat. They can be affected by stress, by lack of sleep, and by your diet. So when you lose weight, ghrelin levels rise, making you want to eat more often. So ghrelin is involved in metabolism, growth, and energy homeostasis, and it's believed to play a role in obesity, eating disorders, and even cancer. It may enhance immune responses, reduce sympathetic nerve activity, and even have cardioprotective effects. It may prevent muscle atrophy, helps to regulate bone formation and metabolism. So people who severely restrict the caloric intake often have high ghrelin levels, which make it even harder to lose weight. You look here, sometimes it's called the hunger hormone. You can see it has lots of different effects, everything from, increasing food intake and mediating glucose homeostasis, having a certain degree of protective effect on the cardiovascular system, promoting fat storage, mediating energy homeostasis, suppressing insulin secretion, reducing gut inflammation, helping with regulation of your body weight, and may even have a role to play in memory and stress. So, still a lot to learn about these hormones, but now we're discovering that part of the whole process of being healthy, and not just a healthy weight, but being healthy in general, is having these hormones in a that are being released in a controlled fashion that are done so in a positive way as opposed to a negative way. Of course, we know that there's a lot of genetic component to obesity. More than 400 genes have been linked to obesity and weight gain, and they affect all sorts of different, including these hormones, by the way, your body fat distribution and metabolism and so forth. It's unclear how much can be genetically predisposed to weight gain or obesity, but some genes have been associated with the difficulty of losing weight, even if you increase physical activity or go on low caloric diets, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware that, you eat less, you exercise more, and you keep putting more weight on, right? That's always fun. So if you have a genetic predisposition for obesity, it is easier to take a proactive stance to weight management. So if you take a preventative approach, this can be more effective because you're trying to prevent this type of scenario from getting out of control in the first place. So some scientists feel that each individual has sort of a set point weight, and your metabolism, hormones, and brain will adjust to kind of essentially maintain that weight. This is still kind of theoretical, and people who may have a naturally higher or lower set weights than others, and their set points can be impacted by genetics, by aging, by history of weight loss, hormonal shifts, for example. This theory suggests that your set point weight or weight point can rise, but rarely lowers, right? So we all know that as you get older, it seems to be more difficult to take weight off and keep it off than when you're younger, right? So it's easier to maintain your set point weight because your body wants to remain at that point and not lose weight. So one has to be realistic and understand sort of what your set point weight is, right? Because it really does differ. I mean, one example I can think of is like Oprah Winfrey, right? She has a set weight point. This just who she is. And, I mean, that's just a classic example of going up and down and up and down. And she finally said, no, this is my this is what my weight point is, and I'm happy with that. I'm good with that kind of scenario. And of course, there's a mental health aspect. We oftentimes tie happiness and emotional health to weight loss. Um, and there's this whole kind of cycle of emotional connection to food and to weight loss and so forth. So one has to be aware of that as well too. And there's many ways of approaching that. I'm not about to get into that. Of course, that's not my expertise. Okay, so this is a webinar on red light therapy, right? So, what's the deal? Does it actually do anything? Can it be a benefit? I'm sure you've probably seen stuff on social media. Most of it's probably garbage or people that don't know what they're talking about. And I don't presume to be the ultimate expert in it, but I certainly have immersed myself for the last 15 years in photobiomodulation and have read all the research. And of course, I've seen patients in clinical settings. So I think I have a good pulse on some advice about red light therapy and weight loss. So let's take a look at some of the research. Now, this paper in part was published by Michael Hamlin. Now, Michael Hamlin, he is retired professor emeritus from Harvard, considered probably the leading expert in red light therapy or photobiomodulation. Anyway, he wrote this with several authors, and here he basically quoted and looked at all the research around the phenomenon of using what he said low level laser therapy or red light therapy for fat layer reduction. And this is a pretty controversial topic because the research is interesting to say the least. So one article talks about, now this is within this article, the effects of red light therapy on fat cells were attributed to the formation of transitory micropores, which were visualized in something called a scanning electron microscope. And what they did was they used red light. You can see the power, 10 milliwatts, pretty low amount of power. And, they visualized this on a scanning electron microscope after red light therapy. And then they said, oh, look, there's pores and lipids escaped. Um, and one of the sort of explanations was that there was an increase in something called ROS, or reactive oxygen species. This is a highly reactive oxygen molecule. And this perhaps can initiate a process called lipid peroxidation, where these ROS molecules react with lipids found within the cellular membranes and temporarily damage them by creating pores. Now, this is a hypothesis. Now, this research has been very difficult to reproduce. So the merits of it are questionable. And this is one of the first papers that came out. When I saw it, I'm like, I don't know about that. And I kind of refrained from really commenting too much on it because there wasn't a lot of research out there. It's been very difficult to reproduce what they found. And I think they lean towards it being an artifact. And this is kind of what it looks like. This is a bilipid membrane, say around a fat cell, and then they sort of showed these pores happening. But I think what they kind of now look, when they look at this, and because they haven't been able to reproduce it to any great extent, that they probably feel it's an artifact. In other words, when they take the cells and prep them to be scanned, these form because of that preparation work. That's what an artifact is. So more than likely, that's probably what's going on there. There's another study here. You can see it below. It was a non-randomized, uncontrolled pilot study demonstrated an actual reduction in serum cholesterol and leptin levels following a red light therapy. So there's some other science around here that shows that maybe it's having some other types of effects. So it's possible that red light therapy stimulates the mitochondria in fat cells or adipocytes, that's a fat cell, and that in turn leads to an increase in ATP synthesis. And this is something that I think anyone that works in this field or understands the main mechanism, that's pretty much understood what's going on. But what happens after that is you have an upregulation of something called cyclic AMP, which I won't get into a lot of craziness about this, but essentially a cyclic AMP, this could activate something called protein kinase, which then stimulates an enzyme called cytoplasmic lipase. And this enzyme then converts triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol, which then can pass through pores formed in the cell membrane or may cause shrinkage in the actual adipocytes, right? So there may be this mechanism that's at play that we know about, but inside the fat cell, it actually reduces the stores of fat, right? And that causes the cells to shrink. And therefore, perhaps this can help with shrinkage of fat cells. This is just a diagram from this paper kind of showing you the light coming in. See, it says wavelength 600 to 900 nanometers. That's usually what's used, red to near infrared. This round blob, a yellow blob, is a fat cell. It absorbs light, goes into cell membrane, into the mitochondria. As I mentioned, produces more ATP. Byproduct of ATP is cyclic AMP. And then this will have a trickle-down effect into perhaps shrinking that cell. So this is just from another paper within that paper, and they showed like healthy fat cells, like they look like blobs, and then fat droplets seeping across adipose cell membrane, and then sort of collapsing of adipose cells. They call this emulsification. This is post laser therapy. Another study, again, this is still within this main study that I've just mentioned, is that there was a double-blinded study they referenced, and they looked at only 9 females, so not a really large sample size, and they evaluated the efficacy of phosphatidylcholine-based anticellulite gel. So this is an actual thing. It's a gel that you put onto your skin over, say, cellulite or extra fat. and it increases cyclic AMP inside. It's absorbed and goes into the fat, and it's been out there as a treatment for cellulite. And then they also combined it with red light therapy, in this case, red and near infrared, for the treatment of cellulite. So here they were treated twice daily for 3 months with an active gel on one thigh and a placebo gel on the other thigh. Twice a week, each thigh was exposed to 15 minutes of LED for a total of 24 treatments. And again, if you have any questions, definitely ask me in the chat box and I will get to that for sure at the end. Then they did digital ultrasound at the dermal adipocyte interface, and it revealed not only significant reduction of subcutaneous fat immediately below the dermis, but also less echo-like intrusions were observed in the dermal layer of active gel and LED-treated thighs. So among 3 of 6 biopsies taken from the thighs that were treated for 3 months, with the active gel in combination with the LED, less intrusion of subcutaneous fat into the papillary reticular dermis have been noted upon histological analysis. Well, that's a mouthful right there, isn't it? However, in 9 placebo, so no gel, and LED only, there were minimal changes, right? So it's kind of like inconclusive here that if it was just a gel or not the gel or better with LEDs, this experiment was not particularly well designed, but it may be helpful. I guess that's the bottom line. Last paper I want to mention here, just looking at the time, is that LLOT, or low-level laser therapy, associated with aerobic and exercise plus resistance training to improve inflammatory biomarkers in obese adults. This is a little bit better study. The purpose of this study was to evaluate the effects of laser therapy combined with aerobic resistance training. And they looked at inflammatory profiles and body composition in 40 obese women aged 20 to 40. You can see the BMIs here, 30 and less than 40 kilograms per metric, square metric. I don't know that BMI exactly how they did that, but I guess it's just measurements. I don't really know. Again, not an expert in that. The volunteers were allocated to 2 different groups, a phototherapy group or a sham. A sham means there's no light therapy. And the interventions consisted of physical exercise training. The phototherapy was near infrared, 808 nanometers. To give you context, BIOFLEX uses around 830 or so nanometers, so it's pretty close to that. Immediately after physical exercise with a specially designed device. And then they also measured pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory markers called adipokines. And it was showed that laser therapy with physical exercise is more effective than physical exercise alone in increasing this marker, this anti-inflammatory marker. It also showed reduced values of neck circumference, insulin concentration, and interleukin-6, which is a inflammatory cytokine in the laser therapy group. So it wasn't just these markers, but the circumference, there was less adipose tissue there when they measured. So in conclusion, phototherapy or red light therapy can be an important tool in obesity, mostly considering its potential effects associated to exercise training in attenuating inflammation in women, being these results applicable in clinical practices to control related risk associated to obesity. So again, the idea here is you're not doing this in isolation. You're doing this with other types of lifestyle management. So that's really important to understand. This is kind of what it looked like, the pads, and then they placed them over the abdomen, the buttock region, wherever in the quads and the hamstring area. You can kind of picture where you might want to do it on yourself or whoever, maybe your dog. Man, I had 2 dogs, and they're both labs. Black lab, he was a mix. Like he could eat and he would constantly eat, and he was lean until the day he died of cancer, like super lean. His brother from another mother, man, this dog also ate everything, another lab, a yellow lab, and just was a balloon. It was so hard to control that dog. So I digress, but maybe you can try this out on your pet at home too. So however you decide to tackle losing weight, remember that there's no magic bullet here, right? Everyone's approach is going to be different. The key is choosing a lifestyle that you can maintain, right? Maintain a healthy, the healthy lifestyle. And this is across the board, from nutrition, increasing fiber, being a little more active. Do whatever you can to be more active. Mental health, including sleep, reducing stress, having social support, including cats or dogs or whatever animal. Actually, it was funny. I have to admit, I do use TikTok, and so I was on it this morning, and there was a clip of someone on a treadmill, and in the little container where you would put your water bottle was their pet rabbit, and the rabbit was sitting there watching them on a treadmill. Anyway, I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so how are you going to use BioFlex, right? So let's talk about the personal systems or the mini-port home. The research is showing you essentially red and near infrared are the best wavelengths. So we really are using those wavelengths, and I posted them there. We use 660 nanometers and around 830 nanometers or thereabouts. The dosage parameters haven't quite well been established, but I firmly believe that there's going to be a window or a range that's going to be effective. And it makes sense that fat tissue is relatively deep, right? And so I would suggest using a protocol that provides a little bit lengthier time and allowing the light to go as deep as possible as well. And red light does seem to be effective as well. It's not going to go as deep, but it seems to be effective too. So I'm going to suggest using the HIP protocol, which is one of the longer protocols in this sort of list that you can choose from, and choose level 2. Okay, so HIP protocol level 2. This is about 8 minutes of red and about 12 minutes of near infrared, so about 20 minutes on one area. Now, of course, you're going to put the pad on multiple areas if that's what your target is, right? If you do this, I would let the pad cool down about 5 minutes or so before putting on the next area. These pads can get warm and even hot if they're overused constantly. So let them cool down a bit. And that's not so much the light as it is the electrical current driving it. So there is a heat sink built into these things. They're designed to be used, obviously, but you do want to let them cool down a little bit in between use. And obviously apply it to where you want to apply it, wherever that may be. And even though some of the research said they were doing, actually twice was for the gel, but most of the time it's daily. And as part of your whole sort of lifestyle change. And then as you sort of reach that sort of comfortable personal weight that you want to sort of keep, then I would suggest that you keep this up over those areas, but you can treat much less frequently, maybe once a week or maybe twice a week. But to constantly stimulate those cells, those adipocytes, I think is probably still a good idea. Now, if you have a red light panel, now our panels do have a mode called weight loss. And although I have to say, I do prefer equipment that touches the skin, but you could probably extrapolate a light coming out of a panel, provided you have bare skin, and that you're within about 30 centimeters of the LEDs. These LEDs are way more powerful than in the personal pads. They have to be because a lot of the light's reflected off the skin. So again, I'm going to suggest here that by the way, if you have questions, type them into the chat box, not the question box. That as long as it's about 20 minutes for protocol wise of the weight loss program or mode, and again, approximately 30 centimeters or thereabouts from the surface of that panel. Okay, I'm going to get to your questions very shortly. I mentioned about Vancouver. That's March 29th and 30th, where I'm doing a Light Up Your Practice, which is an introduction to photobiomodulation all day. If you happen to be in the Vancouver area, or you maybe just want to go out there and visit in the springtime, it's a beautiful, then I certainly invite you to come by. and sign up for this event. On this Sunday, I'm doing a half-day advanced training with special guests, which I will be naming shortly, but I'll give you a hint. I believe it will be Ashley Bonjon from South Africa, who's a neurologist, talking about post-concussion therapy. And also, we have a co-sponsor, Violite. If you haven't heard about Violite, they make specific red light therapy equipment for helping with everything from like mental health and brain issues and sleep disorders, and treating cognitive issues. That could be post-concussion, that could be other types of issues, related to neurological. So they'll be co-hosting that event on Sunday, and there'll also be an appearance there on Saturday as well if you're interested in them. And lastly, we are having a big Valentine's Day sale. Buy one, get 50% off. So if you are interested in that, let's go to our website and you can find a little bit more information about that. Okay, so let's see your questions here. So how can I use this mini port? Okay, I think I answered that, Gary. Okay, so I guess Gary's asking so I guess the point here is that if you have a large area that you're trying to tackle this red light, I get that it could be a lot of time. You don't have to do every square centimeter of body tissue, like over your abdomen, probably a couple spots would be fine. So you maybe do a couple spots in the morning, and then maybe if you want to do over your leg or whatever, or other areas as well. I get that it can be a little bit time consuming. But for this to work, there has to be enough dosage into the cells. Oh, so someone, Jem is mentioning about a beagle she had, who had an off valve on her hunger. Changing her to a raw food diet really helped regulate her weight. Yeah, no, I know raw food apparently is a good way to go too for dogs. I only have a cat right now, so. Oh, active gel. To be honest, I'm not in that space. I'm not quite sure, but this active gel has some active ingredient that somehow increases cyclic AMP. To be honest, I didn't research it. You'll have to do a bit of research on your behalf if you're interested in that. And I don't know if it's commercially available or if it's what the deal is with that. So again, with the therapist system, which is our professional system, again, same deal. I would use the HIP protocol on there, just the pad, no laser. And in that case, I'd probably go with the level 1. You can maybe do the level 2 as well too. But yeah, that would be the similar protocol to use. Do you need to start the array, use it at HIP level 1 or start directly at level 2? I think I mentioned start at level 2 in this case. Awesome. Okay. Thanks for joining me, everyone. We will see you next webinar in a couple weeks. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.